Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, I should say, and thank you for joining us for part 2 in our gender equity series. This afternoon's webinar is about supporting transgender and gender expansive students. And before I hand the reins over to Ruthie, I, as usual, need to take care of some housekeeping items. As participants, you are in listen-only mode, but you do have the ability to ask questions and comment either via the questions or chat feature, or if you have a working microphone, you are more than welcome to use the raise hand feature, and I can unmute you and you can speak through your microphone as well. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the ICSPS website for review at a later date, or for you to send out to any other constituencies who maybe weren't able to be on the call this afternoon. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ruthie and we will jump right in.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. Today is part 2. Right now we're going to do part 2 of today's training, which is supporting transgender and gender expansive students. So part 1 kind of gave you an overview, some really 101 level terminology. So now we are going to expand upon that. My favorite part of this PD is the let's practice portions, where I will give scenarios. So feel free to interact in the chat if you would like, or you can reflect upon the questions yourself. There is some video and listening pieces for this afternoon, and so I hope that you will enjoy those. So my name is Ruthie Moore. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm an inclusive schools educator with the Illinois Safe Schools Alliance. So I will skip over the part, I actually took it out of the presentation, that details the differences between the Public Health Institute of Metro Chicago and the Illinois Safe Schools Alliance. So with that being said, I will jump right in. Okay, so risk factors. So from a 2017 Gleason National Climate Survey, 71% of students reported hearing negative remarks about gender expression from teachers and other staff members. So 55.3% of LGBT students were harassed or assaulted in school, and they did not report the incident to school staff because they doubted that effective intervention would occur. So about 80% of transgender students feel unsafe at school, and those who are able to persevere through the feeling of feeling unsafe have significantly lower GPAs and are more likely to miss school out of concern for their safety. And so those are some of the risk factors for LGBT plus students. When we think of some of the risks inside of school and outside of school, we have things like transgender youth are 8 times more likely to attempt suicide. Half of transgender youth experience homelessness. 15% leave school, and 78% report harsh treatment. Now, when we think of some of the risks associated while in school, 3 of these examples generally talk about inside of school. So this doesn't even touch on the risk factors outside of school. And one thing to note, that a lot of these are barriers that prevent young people from continuing their education on. So Gender 101. So in our PD this morning, we talked about all of these words. And so Just wanted to put this up here as a slight refresher on a few key terms. So remember, gender binary is the categorization of gender into two distinct opposite sexes. Transgender is the umbrella term applied to those whose gender identity is not the same as the sex they were assigned at birth. Cisgender is someone who identifies exclusively as their sex assigned at birth. Queer gender, a term applied to individuals who do not identify within the gender binary. And a transition is the process of someone's gender expression, changing someone's gender expression to match their gender identity. So sex does not equal gender. So what does that mean? So sex is a biological construct that refers to our physical attributes and our genetic makeup. So some of those physical attributes are internal reproductive organs, genitalia, secondary sex characteristics. Some of the genetic makeup are things such as hormones and sex chromosomes. Now, as we dive deeper into our understanding of transgender and gender expansive identities, let us talk about a couple other terms. So when we think of the term intersex, or what is called DSD, or diversity of sex development, this umbrella term describes the combination of chromosomes, hormones, internal sex organs, genitalia, than what would differ from the expected patterns of male and female. And so when we think of an intersexed person, or DSD, or diversity of sex development, we want to note that because of the bearing on physical attributes and genetic makeup. So terminology can get very, very, very convoluted. And let me just note that language is forever changing. So when we say male, female, intersex, those are words that are commonly used to describe an individual's sex. Now, any questions, comments, or concerns thus far? I don't see any in the chat. Okay, let me check the questions. Okay, I don't see any either. I will move right on. So, gender does not equal sex. Gender is a social construct that refers to roles, behaviors, activities, and attributes that a given society considers appropriate for boys, girls, or men and women. So gender does not equal sex. So gender includes physiological, behavioral, social, cultural aspects of being masculine and feminine. So when we say gender expectations, these are culturally specific, they vary throughout time, and they're passed on both implicitly and explicitly. Now, when we say vary throughout time, that is mostly referring to the quintessential social roles of gender roles of men and women throughout society and throughout history. And those obviously have changed over time. And we understand that that social constructs change over time, and what was considered to be acceptable or normal today is quite different from what was acceptable or normal during the 18th century. So think about the lawmakers signing the Constitution, wearing the wigs and the robes. And so today the expectation is for lawmakers to wear suits. And so So gender is a social construct that, if you like to study history and things like that, history is a great lens to study gender through. So again, the main words that we use to describe an individual's gender are commonly man, woman, both, or neither. So gender identity is not determined by genitals or sex assigned at birth. Now that's an easy one because we talked about that during our morning presentation. But it is so important to lay the foundation for the understanding of the remainder of our PD today. So this is about a 3-minute video that I'm going to play, and it talks about intersecting identities. Now, in this morning's presentation, I asked you, what are some of your own identities that you bring, that you hold, and how does that overlay with your professional responsibility? And so this video is from a youth perspective related to what it means to have intersecting identities. Okay, I'm sorry, I gotta get that sound right. Let me just exit out of here really quickly. Okay. I'm sorry about that. Let me try that again.
Everything I do. I play volleyball and track and cross country. I love school and exercise, EP runners classes right now. I'm just really excited. People see me as this flamboyant, cool person that I think I am. So, music, I play the cello, well, a couple other instruments, but all around, I'm pretty geeky, fun kind of guy or girl. Of anything, I identify as Mexican and a lesbian and a woman. I come from a hardworking family, and I feel that that shouldn't come from either. I'm African American descent, and I have a spiritual background, and I'm genderqueer. I identify as a lesbian on the LGBTQ spectrum. I'm just I'm bisexual boy from the Bronx. Queer primarily, and then transgender, and lesbian, and genderqueer, and other things like that. I'm a gay, lower middle class, Polish, Puerto Rican male who's basically lived in New Jersey for his entire life. But I really don't like labels, so I identify as human. I identify as Conrad, to put it simply. I identify as pansexual. I love based on personality. I don't really consider people's gender. I would say that I would identify as an openly gay man. I'm especially Hispanic. I identify as gay. And also very important to my identity is that I came from a rural community. I identify as a lesbian and also as gender nonconforming. There's a traditional definition of a binary gender system of male and female, but I think that most people fall somewhere in between, and it's not just like black and white. So I identify as maybe somewhere in between. I would identify myself as gay. I was raised in Mexico for 6 years and basically a New Yorker. I consider myself a New Yorker because until now. Well, right now I'm gender non-conforming. I would like to fully transition in the future, but just right now in my current life, it's not really possible. So I'm trying to be content with gender non-conforming. I don't really identify as fully male or fully female. I just sort of, I'm androgynous. I'm not really either gender. I'm just sort of me. Yeah.
did see that that didn't quite match up. Let me see what we have in the chat. So the video answered the question. And let's see here. So the sound is cutting out and not matching up. And remember, I'm going to share the link out to all of these presentations. And I think I got all the questions. Video answered the question. Okay. So one of the things to think about related to gender identity is how we hold multiple identities at one time. And related to the young people in the video, what are some of the identities that you heard me say? Okay, great answers. When we think about gender identity and sexuality, those are just a part of a person's identity. And when generally we like to allow young people to self-identify to determine their own identities. And part of the trick is to mirror the language back to them. And so how do you engage in conversations with young people around identities? How do you then listen to what they say to mirror the language back? So something like that does take practice as well as rapport. You have to have rapport with the young people. And so as we move on to our next slide, one best practice is to, as you are thinking through how to structure your school environment, keep in mind that the goal is for students to move throughout the day in accordance with their gender identity. And so you saw all of the young people that hold all the different identities. So how do we create environments for those young people to be able to thrive? What do we need to have in order for them to act in accordance with their gender identity? So what are some common needs of gender and gender expansive young people? So the next thing that we are going to do, we're going to talk about some of the common needs. And before we do that, can you think of any common needs that young people who identify as LGBTQ+ would need in a school environment? Okay, so I'm going to skip this video temporarily so that we can talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So in order for a student to be able to be available for learning, their basic needs have to be met. So what are some of those common needs? So physiological, something as simple as breathing, food. Safety, we have resources, security. Love and belonging, friendship, family. Esteem, we have confidence, achievement. Self-actualization, we have problem solving, lack of prejudice, spontaneity. So these are all things that we as people, as well as young people, need. And this is according to Maslow. And so when we think about creating environments for young people and mitigating those common barriers that they have, this is a base level of what they need. And so when we think about what are some of the common needs of gender expansive and transgender students, how do we move beyond this basic needs? Are these basic needs being met? So inclusive curriculum. So the chart that we looked at in our last presentation related to how to examine your curriculum is very helpful. And one way that you can always examine your curriculum is to ask yourself and your students, what is missing? Now, the key word in there is also ask your students, because when we engage young people in these conversations, oftentimes we can use conversation as the curricular tool. So also include books with diverse families and characters. And so I believe it's toward the end of the PowerPoint presentation, we have a book listing, a nice screenshot of a bunch of books that we've gathered. And shameless plug again for our inclusive curriculum PD, if there's any interest in diving more into actual curriculars, state standards, things like that related to the inclusive curriculum law that J.B. Pritzker passed, please reach out to the Illinois Safe Schools Alliance. So here is the recommended reading that we have compiled. And when we include books with diverse families and characters, that is one of the most simple ways to teach young people about diversity within families. Now, how to be an ally. So once we have created our affirming learning environment, we've been looking at our curriculum for hidden assumptions and gender practices. How do we actually become an ally? And so it is to incorporate those themes and identities throughout your curriculum. Understand that LGBTQ+ identities can be discussed in developmentally appropriate ways, like the book listings and things that we talked about. And also have representations of LGBTQ+ people visible in your school and your classroom. So these are just three quick examples of ways to insert and how to be an ally related to curriculum. So if you are a math teacher, you could use a word problem that includes some gender identity language. For science, we can talk about Nemo the clownfish. And if you are into history, we could talk about the civil rights movement and Bayard Rustin. I'm going to pause for any questions, comments, or concerns. And I'm going to check the chat for questions. Okay, I will keep going. I don't see any. Okay, so.
Ruthie, we did have one question come in. Do you have any book recommendations for college level students?
So yes, we do. I will write that down. So we include the majority of those resources within our PD related to inclusive curriculum. And thank you so much, Brittany, for helping me answer that. It's a little bit difficult to navigate between the questions at the same time. But I am trying. I don't see the chat. Okay, so I see a question box. Okay, so I'm going to close the question box and when we think of who gets to use which restroom, our next PD on tomorrow is more litigious and legal. So this is just a small foray into what we will be seeing tomorrow. So before we kind of dive into some of the some of the more legal, I would like us to go back to our video. And this particular video is important because we talked about pronouns in our presentation earlier, but before we really dive into things like restroom accessibility, I want to make sure that we have a good grasp on things like pronouns. And so this is I think this video is about 3 minutes. And it's important because I would like us to hear from young people. And so let me make sure that let me try to get this timing right on this.
Wow.
Oh my God.
Okay. So sorry, just takes a little bit of maneuvering. So let me just try this way. Okay.
Wow.
Oh my God. What a
Pronouns are basically words used to refer to a person rather than a name.
They, she, and he are all examples of common. He and she are gendered pronouns.
She is typically used by people who identify as female, and he is typically used by people who identify as male. However, he or she pronouns are sometimes used by people who don't identify as strictly male or female.
Some people prefer gender-neutral pronouns. Gender-neutral pronouns are generally used by people who identify as genderqueer or non-binary.
A few common gender-neutral pronouns are they, they, and they, but there are a whole array of gender-neutral pronouns.
People think long and hard about the pronouns they'd like to use and why.
If you use the wrong pronoun for someone, that's what's called misgendering.
When a person has new pronouns, it can take a bit of getting used to, but it's really important to use the right one.
Person's identity is very important, and it's super important to respect that.
So when people use the wrong pronoun for me, I find that I've gone through all this effort to kind of come out and be myself, and it's kind of just thrown back in my face. Coming out for me was mainly awkward with a lot of people that used to know me who didn't understand. I think there is a lot of misunderstanding. When people get my pronouns right, it makes me feel like I'm, being myself, and people are responding to that and just like respecting me as a person.
When people get my pronouns right, I feel respected by them, and I end up feeling a lot more comfortable around them. Sometimes, if you identify someone with a different pronoun that they don't identify as, you can potentially actually upset them. And I don't think it should be upsetting someone in this process, and that's why I think it's very important to know what someone identifies themselves as and respect it.
It's not about like you're a terrible person if you mess up, or you're a terrible person if you mess up. It's really not. But it's more about making an extra effort for someone that you do care about, or just kind of being a bit considerate that everyone has different needs, and it's just a really cool thing to do for a person. And I think it's easy to not quite get that, or just see it as, there's a person who's mad at you, and outwardly they might be a little bit upset, but inwardly what they're feeling that's motivating that reaction is so much more an understanding that they're not hating on you, it's just that they really are probably a bit up, a bit hurt.
It's not always easy to come out and tell people that you're trans. Never assume someone's pronouns, just ask if you're not sure. Using the correct pronouns is a pretty big deal, and it's a really awesome thing to do. Gender, don't equal gender.
This is probably the biggest mistake people. It's a pretty easy assumption to make, but genitals and body don't actually reflect anything about a person's gender at all.
Above all else, don't try and argue with this person, whether you personally agree or not. A person who's asking you to use those pronouns likely has put a lot of thought into it and trusts you. Basically, what's more important? Someone's anatomy or who they really are and their happiness.
Sometimes, however, you will slip up and use the wrong pronoun. It's not good, but it does happen.
Getting used to someone's new pronoun can take time.
And you may feel pretty awkward or even guilty when you make a mistake.
Some may sound pretty strange at first, and changing the words you use in general can be harder than expected.
If you do slip up accidentally, it's important to not lash out at the person or blame them. You might not pick it up instantly, and it's important to try hard on it. If you do slip up, don't snap on it.
Just keep trying your best and you'll get the hang of it with time.
Don't freak out. Just make a quick apology, correct yourself, and keep going with the conversation.
Making a big deal out of it. It's probably going to make them feel bad and make the situation very uncomfortable for both of you.
If you hear someone deliberately or even accidentally using the wrong pronouns for a person, don't hesitate to pull them up on it and politely correct them.
Hopefully that helps to explain pronouns a little bit better and lets you know how much it can mean to a person. And it's super important to get them right as much as possible.
Something as small as a tiny word like that.
So in terms of pronouns, one of the most important things is to call people by the pronouns that they like, that they want to go by. And so we are going to take about 3 to 4 minutes. I would like you to write down 5 reasons, or you can put in the chat, or you can work personally, 5 reasons why pronoun usage is important. And so this is the only reflecting piece I will ask you to do. So please take 2 to 3 minutes to write down 5 reasons why pronoun usage is important. And then we'll come back together and we will share out. Okay, I hope that everyone could delve a little bit deeper into pronouns and what makes pronouns so important for us. And so would anybody like to share out in the chat why they think pronoun usage is important? So all we need is just one person to write in the chat.
So Ruthie, we had a few come through. How you see the person, acknowledgement of their identity, respect and acceptance of who they are.
Perfect. Yes. And so it is. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Brittany.
Yeah, makes the student more comfortable in class, increase better communication between teacher and student, empowers the individual to be.
Awesome. Those are really, really great. I wish I could see those. So when I like to, the reason why I'm emphasizing pronouns is because calling somebody by the name that they want is such a basic thing, a basic way to empower them. And when we take the time to learn about pronouns, and when we take the time to learn about pronoun usage, it just really elevates our affirming learning environments. It just elevates it to the next level. And so systematically, it's really important to embed pronouns along with collecting demographic information from young people. And that way you normalize pronouns. Now, when we have some scenarios for our practice at the end that talks about, well, how do we deal with young people that transition mid-year? How do we deal with young people who transition after a Christmas break? And so we will talk about some of those things because those things are things that are better to navigate on the front end versus having to navigate on the back end. And again, apologies for the technical difficulties with the video and the audio not matching up. And so we did try to troubleshoot this a little bit better, but I think that like for the moving forward, like what I will make sure to do is to not only send out these presentations so that you can have them ahead of time. So our next slide. So we already went over the hierarchy of needs. Okay, so now, before we can really talk about restrooms and locker rooms, it is so important for us to have that base knowledge and that base level understanding. So now we got pronouns down. We are all good on that. Y'all understand the 3 components of gender. We talked about some terminology. Now let's get into some more of the nuanced things. So students can access restrooms and locker rooms that correspond with their gender identity. The single-use bathroom may not be given as the only option for transgender or gender nonconforming students. And the reason why we put this in a slide this way is because oftentimes the single-use bathroom or the unisex bathroom or the one-stall bathroom is given as the only option for transgender and gender nonconforming students. But in fact, these students can access any restroom that corresponds with their gender identity. And the third point on here says that any student who has a need or desire for increased privacy has the right to access a single user restroom. So essentially what this means is that a student does not have to be transgender or gender nonconforming to use any restroom that they want. And so oftentimes there is pushback from families or other students related to restroom usage. And what you can say to a concerned parent regarding restroom usage is that your young person also has the ability to use whichever restroom they like to. And so let me check for any chat. Okay. So this is a video, but I will spare you the lag and I will make sure to send this out. But this video is called Megan's Story, and it deals with a transgender young person that is experiencing what is called school pushout. And school pushout generally occurs when some of those protective factors, those common needs, some of the things from Maslow's hierarchy are not met. That equals school pushout. And so we will have a few examples of school pushout in some subsequent slides, and I will be sure to point it out diligently. Okay, so practical application. Terminology, legal terms are good, but how do we actually apply these things? So when someone asks to use the bathroom, be sure to tell them where all the facilities are, including the gender neutral bathroom. So just as a best practice, tell them where all the restrooms are. And by doing that, you eliminate having to guess which bathroom they are referring to. And so don't assume that if someone's asking you to use the restroom that they are seeking a male, female, or gender neutral bathroom. Just tell them where all the bathrooms are. So as a general rule, it is okay to presume that someone is being intentional about the bathroom that they are entering. So what does that mean? That means that if you are in a men's bathroom and a woman walks in, what you perceive to be a woman walks in, as a general rule, presume that person is in the correct bathroom. Presume that that person knew which bathroom to walk into. If you have concerns about someone entering a bathroom to cause harm to another person, respond in a way that is about the harm, not about the person's identity. Now, this is an important point because sometimes we have hangups about bathroom usage because of what we would deem to be safety or not safety. And so we want to respond in a way that is about the harm, not about the person's identity. So let's practice. And again, these practice parts are my absolute favorite because it gives us some practical ways to implement the things that we're talking about. And so if anybody wants to answer any of these questions in the chat, feel free to do so. So a 10th grade student has recently come out to a teacher as transgender. The student is transmasculine, and that means they were assigned female at birth and they identify as a boy. The teacher tells the student he has to use the nurse's bathroom at school. The student comes to you, and through conversation, you learn that he wants to use the boys' bathroom. What steps would you take to support the student? So a couple things to note. The first thing is the teacher tells the student he has to use the nurse's bathroom. Is this true or false? If you said that that is false, you are correct. The student can use whatever bathroom they want. They don't have to use the nurse's bathroom. This is a violation of the student's rights. So what steps could you take to support the student? So one of the first things that I would do personally is I would go to my colleague and I would talk to my colleague. That would be the first thing that I would do, depending on the type of rapport that I had. So after I talk to my colleague, how would I support my colleague in their learning process? So in order to support that colleague in their learning process, I would simply inform them that the student does not have to use the nurse's bathroom, and that the student can use whichever bathroom that they want. I would talk to the student because obviously the student came to me, and through conversation, I learned which bathroom they wanted to use. So I have rapport built with the student. So I would encourage the student, and I would also acknowledge the student for being able to talk to me. So one of the things that is always kind of tough is mid-year transitions. And so in this particular scenario, we're just assuming that school has already been in session for a while and the student has recently come out. And so we always have to make sure that within mid-year transitions that we have the proper supports around the young person, school staff, administrators, counselors, social workers. We cannot assume that this young person has support at home. If a young person does not have support at home, that is a wholly different way that it has to be navigated. And so that's why it's important as schools and administrators to put protocols in place beforehand. So ideas for locker room accommodations. So if any student has the need or desire for increased privacy, the school should provide options. So what are some of those options? Install privacy curtains. You can have private areas in the locker room, an adjusted changing schedule, locker assignment in close proximity to close or supportive staff so they can kind of keep an eye on them, the use of a nearby private area, and intentional class assignment with supportive peers. So sometimes matching up other young people with other supportive young people is a great way to help young people. Now, again, it is best to have policies in place before you absolutely have to have policies in place. So in this type of work, be proactive instead of reactive. You can't predict everything, but what policies does your school currently have in place related to bathroom usage and locker room accommodations? So I will pause and check the chat. So I'm not saying anything, so I will move on. Okay, so let's practice. A parent calls you and says they heard there is a transgender child in their child's class. They go on to say that their child's privacy is being threatened because they have to share a bathroom and locker room with a transgender person. They ask what is being done to ensure their child will not have to use the bathroom and locker room with a transgender person. How do you respond to this parent? Well, the first thing is you cannot disclose information about another student to a parent. So the way you could respond to this parent is to let them know you hear their concerns, and also to let them know that their child has the ability to use whichever bathroom they would like to use. And so if their child is having concerns about their privacy, then their child can use whichever bathroom they would like, or whichever locker room they would like. So it is important that you don't violate any young people's rights. And also, y'all, just so y'all know, sometimes a parent might call and say, you know, my child said X, Y, and Z, but sometimes it could very well be the parent. So also keep that in mind. So true or false? Schools do not need a student to provide proof of a medical or legal transition in order to access aspects of a social transition at school. So is it true or is it false? The answer is true. Schools do not need a student to provide proof of a medical or legal transition to access aspects of a social transition. And remember, a transition is thought of in 3 different parts: social, legal, medical. Now, most young people, remember, they start their transitions socially. And so if a young person is transitioning socially, they don't have to have medical or legal proof. The school doesn't. Bam. Let's practice again. So after winter break, a student comes to you and tells you they are agender and would like to start using the name gray and the pronouns they or them. Now remember, we talked about how these mid-year transitions are difficult because they've already established relationships with peers. They've already, have been engaging with their teachers and other classmates. And so now this is a mid-year transition. So this looks vastly different than a transition that a young person went through and then started the school year. So what would be important questions to ask Gray? So the first thing that we should ask Gray is, hey Gray, how do you want your peers to get this information? So as the adult, the responsibility is on us. So we have to ensure that Gray is comfortable and supported. So we have to ask Gray, hey Gray, how do you want your peers to get this information? And what does that look like? And then Gray might say, I'll tell them. Or Gray might say, well, teacher, I want you to tell them. Or you can say, hey Gray, we can do it together. We can come up with a curricular exercise and do it together. So how would you plan for Gray's transition in the classroom? What would be important elements to consider? So the way that you have to plan for Gray's transition is to think about your other young people that you have in your classroom. So what would be important elements to consider? Those important elements to consider are, how does this not only impact Gray, but how does this now impact the other young people? How do we introduce Gray to the other young people? Now, what would be other important elements to consider? So those other important elements to consider are your curricular and classroom management practices. Do you already have gender neutral classroom management curriculum and practices in place? If not, it will be a great time to implement some. So mid-year, an 11th grade student, along with their parents, have requested that you use a name different than the child's legal name. When their teacher starts doing this in class, the other students begin asking, why are you using a different name? So before we go through the bullet points of how to respond and how to support, the thing to note is that this young person has the support of their parents. So their transition is going to be more supported. Now, how do you respond to the question from other students when they say, why are you using a different name? Now, before you can even respond to this question from the other students, you have already had a conversation with this student and their parents. And that is how you answer that question for your other young people, is based on what the students and their parents have already outlined as the plan. How can you support the teacher and the student in the classroom environment? So the way that we support the teacher and the student is to make sure that their transition, that their mid-year transition is in alignment with how they want it to go. We want the young person to feel empowered as much as possible. Now, when we say, how do you support the teacher and the student? This question right here, we really like to hone in on having systematic administrative practices in place. So when you have these systematic and administrative practices in place, then it enables the teachers to then follow a protocol. So confidentiality. The school has the responsibility to keep information about a student's transgender status, legal name, or biological sex assigned at birth. So remember when that other parent called and said that their child's rights were being violated because a transgender student was able to use the restroom? This is where this confidentiality piece comes in. You cannot disclose to that parent that about another young person's status. So disclosing this information might violate such laws as FERPA, Federal Education Rights Privacy Act, the Illinois School Student Records Act, and the Mental Health and Disabilities Confidentiality Act. Now, in terms of legal, in our presentation tomorrow, we will dive more deeply into FERPA and the ISRA. I will pause for questions, comments, or concerns.
So we do actually have a hand raised.
Awesome.
Participation in here. Carol, I am going to unmute you. Maybe.
And thank you so much, Brittany, for helping me with this.
Oh, absolutely. All right, Carol, are you there? Carol, can you hear us? Okay, she may not have a working microphone, but she did pop her question in the chat. So what are the federal guidelines on names? So with students changing their name?
So we will dive super deeply into that tomorrow. But the federal guidelines, so one way that teachers, administrators, and schools are able to kind of assist young people when they do change names or change pronouns, because mind you, most young people start their transition socially, so legally their names are their legal names, and so some schools have implemented putting pronouns onto student IDs, and also on student IDs, young people can have a preferred name. And so the legal nature of transitions for young people is even more complex than for adults, because oftentimes you need, guardian permission for a lot of these things. And so on tomorrow, we will get into the actual verbiage of the law and what that looks like in terms of a name change for a young person.
And I will share out that registration link in the questions chat feature here in a bit. But we did have one more question come through. How do you protect a student's privacy? So I clearly understand you don't talk with a student's parents or another student's parent, but what is your responsibility in keeping the student's classmates from disclosing this information?
So you can't, because we can't make the young people sign like NDAs or anything like that. And so as the adult, you just have to be mindful that if you do get a call from a parent or a concerned guardian, that you already have a system in place to fill those. And so I would ask, how do you normally respond to a concern or complaint from a student or a young person? Do you already have some of those protocols in place for your school? Now, you cannot ever prevent a young person from disclosing what's happening within the classroom amongst their peers. But the thing that you do have control over is if that parent calls you, if that parent wants to discuss it or talk about it. And during tomorrow's workshop, we will dive super deep into the laws related to supporting transgender and gender expansive young people. And a lot of the laws, they intersect. FERPA, ISRA, and the Mental Health and Disabilities Confidentiality Act, they really encompass each other in terms of protecting and not violating laws related to young people and status associated with identity. Now, so follow the lead. So if we let young people take the lead on things, then oftentimes it saves us from having to do so much work. So we know that transgender and gender expansive students have the right to openly discuss their identity and expression. Transgender and gender expansive young people also have the right to privacy around whether or not they would like to discuss or disclose information about their identity. Now, when we say they have the right, that cannot, to circle back to the question that was asked in the chat about, well, how do we prevent other young people from disclosing? You can't. And also, one reason why we always want to make sure that we are following the lead of the young person in question is to prevent them from having their rights violated. So if you allow the young person in question, preferably their families, the rest of their support systems, to be in the driver's seat, then you can just follow their lead. And that is a very effective strategy, particularly if your school system or organization currently does not have specific policies or practices in place. But one of the most holistic things is to follow the lead of the young person in their support systems within the confines of the policies that you've already put into place and that you've implemented, because you are ahead of the game, so to speak. Okay, I will go on to the next slide. So dress codes. So students can dress in a manner consistent with their gender identity or gender expression within the constraints of the dress code. So what does that mean? We know that a lot of schools have dress codes. Pretty much all schools have dress codes. And so students can dress for their gender identity within the confines of the dress code. So, for example, at special events like prom or graduation or school dances, young people can wear whatever they want to wear. When we know that school is a gendered place in general, and so dress codes are really important, just as a general school rule, but it's also important that young people can dress in a manner that is consistent with their gender identity. And about 31% of transgender students have been prevented from wearing clothes at school because they were deemed to be inappropriate based on their gender identity. So that is an important thing to note. School as gendered places, think of something as simple as athletic uniforms. Those oftentimes can be very gendered. Things like school uniforms, those can also be gendered. And so just know that a young person that was born a male and identifies as a girl, they can wear the khaki skirt bottom instead of the pants if they would like to, because that is in line with their gender expression. And we know young people can express their gender how they want. So let's practice again. A freshman student, Jacob, was assigned male at birth. He wears eyeliner, lip gloss, and feminine tops to school. His fifth period teacher consistently sends him out of class to wash his face and change his clothes because she feels he is disrupting the educational environment. Jacob comes to you and tells you that this is happening and asks you to help him figure out how to address the situation. So the first question is, should Jacob have to wash his face and change his clothes? What do you think? Throw it in the chat. If you said no, you are absolutely correct. Now, the only way that Jacob would have to wash his face is if the school had a no makeup policy in general. And that means that no one can wear eyeliner or lip gloss. Now, how might you support Jacob? Because mind you, Jacob came to you because you are a trusted adult and Jacob told you what was happening. How might you support Jacob? The first thing you could do is you could express to Jacob the bravery associated with being able to come and talk to you about this. Another thing that you could do to support Jacob is to go and holler or go talk to your fifth period colleague to let them know that they are violating Jacob's rights. And the last thing to note is the term disrupting the educational environment. So why might the teacher say that? What else is missing from here that would have a teacher classify Jacob wearing eyeliner, lip gloss, and feminine tops as disrupting the educational environment? What does that actually mean? Well, the fifth period teacher could be referring to the reaction of other young people. And so in that case, that is what needs to be addressed also. And so that is just an example related to dress codes and the enforcement of dress codes and what that looks like. So physical education, health class, sports, clubs, and school events. Students must be permitted, and this is specifically in Illinois. And again, tomorrow we are going to get all legal. And so students must be permitted to participate in recreational, physical education, health, clubs, and non-competitive sports in accordance with their gender identity. Yes, it is true. Participation in competitive athletic activities and contact sports will be resolved in accordance with the Illinois High School Association rules, the good old IHSA. And so again, tomorrow we are going to dive into some IHSA legal as well as some IESA legal. So let me check the chat. Okay, I don't see any questions. Let me see. Okay, so let's see. Okay, all right, so I will keep going. I'm almost to the end. So, tips for the classroom. Use non-gendered language. You know, we just keep emphasizing that. It's you just have to practice. Move away from gender being the primary identifier for children. Remember, schools are just gendered places. Society is a gendered place. And when it comes to young people, we gender them all the time, just based on toys and things like that. Don't divide young people into groups by gender. Boys versus girls. This is just the easy classroom management function. Have books, photographs, dolls, and toys that challenge gender stereotypes available to students. Now we put dolls, toys, and gender stereotypes that challenge students, available to students, because not all young people are really reading books. You know, you might work with younger children who play with toys. And so when we think of books and photographs and things like that, those are also for younger students and moving up into like the college level, which I did take note that someone did ask for some of those resources. So I'm going to pull those from our inclusive curriculum law, and I'll make sure to get that sent to Brittany. And I'll also give out my contact information so that y'all can contact me directly if necessary. Additional resources, still the same slide. And then we have this wonderful evaluation link. And the thing that I like about this particular PD that we just did is it's setting us up for tomorrow when we really dive into some of the legal terminology, some of the legal cases, some of the case law, and some of the laws. And so this particular presentation is really important because it gives us the beginning. It helps us to begin to think about some of the things within our own schools and within our own organizations that impact the rights of transgender and gender expansive students. And then tomorrow we're going to dive into the legal part. I'm going to now stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to look in the chat for any questions, comments, or concerns. Okay, I am not seeing any. Okay, Brittany, do you want to chime back in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I went ahead and posted the registration link for tomorrow's webinar. It is tomorrow at 10 a.m. Where Ruthie will dive more into the legalese of everything we've just discussed. This webinar, as well as part 1 that was this morning, have both been recorded and will both be available on the ICSPS website for you to review, as well as tomorrow's webinar if you are unable to attend live. And all 3 of the webinars are geared towards both the secondary and post-secondary system. So, you know, and when you talk about the different individual systems and looking at secondary, having minor students versus post-secondary, where typically the students are 18 or older, some things do change, but for the most part, this is all encompassing for all students. So I do want to thank Ruthie again for the great information this afternoon. And like I said, please be sure to check out tomorrow's webinar and visit the ICSPS website for the resources as well as the recorded webinars. And we will also be sending out the evaluation link and the follow-up email that all participants will be receiving tomorrow. So thank you all so much. I hope it was helpful information, and hopefully we'll see you all back tomorrow morning.